All right, we're live. Welcome to another episode of the WP Crowd. Special shout out to a Frenchman named Maxime. Maxime, I don't even know how to pronounce his French name because he told me my sound sucks. So this is me with my new microphone that I purchased because he's a Frenchman who made fun of me. Um, let's go through introductions. We only have a few people on today, so Chris, why don't I start with you?
Chris Wigman was a senior web engineer with TEDup, built a few plugins, crashed a few airplanes, all sorts of stuff coming from Sarasota, Florida.
And Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Butcher. I'm with WP Security Lock. I clean hacked websites and teach people how to use WordPress.
And I'm Roy. I work at Disney, WordPress developer, and I am co-founder of Art Control. We make apps and stuff like CodeCavalry.com. So just to go through what's been going on lately, not too much news. I know 4.3.1, right, came out?
Correct. And 4.2.5, and however far that backported.
Yeah, so some security updates came out this week. I know because I got 17 emails saying my WordPress was automatically updated. Anything major that was updated? I honestly haven't had time to even read the changelog.
It didn't fix the Chrome bug.
Didn't fix the Chrome bug, so another week with the Chrome bug still out there, and everyone asking me and on the forums and Facebook what's going on with WordPress and Chrome because no one seems to be able to read that there's a Chrome bug out there. I noticed some WordPress WP drama going on. There's been some code of conduct things happen at WordCamps. I don't know what's going on. I don't really want to get into it, but people, seriously, there's a code of conduct. It's not that hard to just be nice and play nice with other people. If they're an asshole to you, you don't have to be an asshole back. And you don't have to be a pig or, whatever. Just be a nice, gentle person, and all will be well. We're a great community. Let's just keep it that way. Did I miss anything? Anything else going on that I might have missed? I've had a pretty busy week, so I haven't been able to keep up 100%.
Not that I know of. The update was the biggest thing I heard.
All right. So we have our first tutorial for WP Crowd. I've been wanting to do. Actually, no, sorry. Michelle did one on Gulp a little while ago, and that was good. But I've been pressuring Chris to do a PHPStorm, or you actually offered to do one a while ago, and we just haven't been able to get it done. So I personally use Coda. I've used all sorts of text editors, code editors before. I tried PHPStorm for about a day when the new one came out, and I just could not get into it. So I've been looking forward to Chris giving us a tutorial on it for quite a while. Because I want to see if it's worth the actual extra time to get into it. Chris, before you start with your screencast, we kind of talked about this in the pre-show a little bit, but what are some high-level things that make PHPStorm, as far as workflow goes in WordPress, a little bit better than some of the other ones out there, like Coda, which a lot of people are using. Sublime, I know, is another very popular one, mainly because it's, I think, free. But what sets PHPStorm apart, and why is it worth, let's say, investing in the license for it?
Technically, keep in mind, your Sublime, that's not free. If you're using it for free, that's technically not how you're supposed to be using it. Do watch the licenses there. It simply just makes it easier. There's so many, but from debugging to keeping up with WordPress core standards to project management, maintaining your code, it really does make things a lot easier to keep running. The cost, I think it's $99 for the first year and $50 after that, unless you have an open source where you can actually get a free copy and this and that. But yeah, it just takes it. It's a true IDE or integrated development environment, so it's not just a text editor. You're not just editing text; it's trying to help you make that text or code better. And it doesn't make your code better. It just takes all sorts of little mundane things like keeping up with the spacing required by certain code standards, or keeping up with line formatting, or whatever it might be, easily accessing functions, easily accessing hooks and documentation on them. Just trying to find all that stuff that just makes it a little bit faster than running a text editor. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Michelle pointed out that if you are a student, you can get it free for a year also. So if you're a student, definitely get on it if you like the presentation. I was going to ask you one more thing. Oh, does it have, so one thing I like about Coda is that you can download, the same with Sublime, you can download plugins and stuff for it, so you can actually get code, what do you call it, code suggestions, like autocorrect or, text.
Most of that stuff's actually built in, but there are, I've got extensions for things like Markdown or various CoffeeScript or various syntax and stuff, Puppet, things like that, that just aren't coming with a PHP IDE and would have no reason to, but they have a fairly significant code library as well. However, you just don't need it as much. It's not like Sublime where everything's a plugin. Here, most stuff's there already.
What about for WordPress specifically? Are there WordPress-specific code libraries that you can kind of have built in?
Yes. In fact, it's got WordPress support where it'll tell you, like if you use a hook, it'll tell you it'll refer you back to the original hook code so you can see what the parameters are. It'll help debug that type of thing. You can integrate with WordPress code standards very easily. It can work with the WordPress library. It does quite a bit in there, just right out of the box even.
Okay, and last thing from me, or a question from me, is again, we've talked a little bit about this before. I'm mainly a front-end developer, so I mean, most people see me as doing a lot of JavaScript work. I do a lot of JavaScript work. JavaScript's not in the title of PHPStorm, so how does PHPStorm work with someone who's, let's say, not doing, let's say, as much PHP work, but maybe a little more JavaScript work?
Sure. It's got support for a lot of the libraries already built in. Like I think Backbone's already in there. I have to look at what's there and what's a plugin. But PHPStorm is the way JetBrains works. It has a separate IDE built on their IntelliJ platform, and then they have a separate IDE for each language. They have WebStorm, which is their JavaScript IDE or their front-end development IDE. PHPStorm is WebStorm with PHP support added. So it's actually a full JavaScript front-end IDE that just adds a little bit more.
And I've seen some things, but I think it does I think you can even get it to do Sass and stuff compiling as well.
Yep, you can set up file watchers for everything from Sass to JavaScript, page refreshes. However you want to do it, you can pretty much integrate darn near anything.
And just to be clear, PHPStorm is, I think it's both Mac and PC, right?
Yeah, it's actually a Java-based IDE, so I think you can probably run it darn near anything.
Awesome. All right, that's it for me. Michelle, did you have any other questions or anything? No. Okay. All right, cool. Chris, take it away. I'm excited to see what you have to show.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here. I've been asked to give a demonstration of PHPStorm here. Wow! That just went off the wall there. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through setting up a WordPress plugin in PHPStorm and just a general workflow for that. In order to do that, I'm actually using something called Primary Vagrant. If you use V, this is just a alternative to V. I had started it before some of the features were in V, or variant vagrants. I'm going to assume that you already have your server set up, whether you're using MAMP, XAMPP, any of that other stuff. The one I'm just using is Primary Vagrant. That's what I'm going to base my demo off of. I've also got a site already set up, just a quick demo site with some plugins installed and things like that. Now to note, the plugin I'm keeping separate from the WordPress install. The code is not within WordPress, so I'll walk you through how to kind of separate that. So if you have a WordPress site somewhere, you can use it for 10 different plugins. Then you can keep your plugin repos clean and outside of them, which just makes it easy. It doesn't matter where you set those up. Now, how you map those into your MAMP or V or Vagrant, topic for a different course, but just keep in mind that is how I have this set up, where the plugin code I'm going to demonstrate is not within the WordPress code itself. So we're going to go ahead and open up PHPStorm here. And because I've already checked out the code for this plugin, I'm just going to create a new project from existing files. It gives us a bunch of options, web server installed locally. I always like this last option, no web server is yet configured. In this case, it's going to come in a little bit handier simply because I'll walk you through configuring all that stuff. But just note that, I mean, if you have something configured, you can set up on any of these. I just prefer the manual way of doing things a little bit better. Asks you where your project is. Because we're doing a WordPress plugin, we're going to actually pick the code for that plugin itself. So I'm going to go to WordPress plugins. I'm going to pick the plugin. This is a plugin I've got in the repo called Better URLs. And we're going to say it's the project root up top. So notice it highlights everything, and we can say finish. At this point, we could actually just roll with this. It's set up. We could start clicking on things. For instance, if we wanted to see where this settings function is, we can highlight it and click a key, and it's going to take us to where settings is. If we want to see where get option is, though, or anything in core WordPress, this is where we've got to start doing some configuring. Like this get option here. If I try to click it's Command V and map to go to source, there's no source. So let's start configuring a few things with this. We're going to bring up the IDE preferences and start setting things up. First thing I'm going to set up is I'm going to go into the version control, just make sure it's got my Git repository. So it's already seen that. So that way I can do all my commits in that through here. If you want to do command line, tower, source tree, you can still do that stuff, but it'll take care of actually the Git work, or if you had FTP work or stuff like that, it'll take care of for you. Other thing we're going to do, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some language stuff. Notice if we look at this languages and frameworks down here, it gives us option for JavaScript settings. We can set things like JavaScript, JS lints, stuff like that. We can include JavaScript libraries. Come in handy. There's not a lot of JavaScript in this one, but the way that works is very similar to what we're going to configure, which is PHP. So what we've got here is we've got an include path. Oops, I just realized something. I've got this set up as another project. That's okay. What it's got here is it's for under PHP, under include path here, it's got the path to WordPress. So whatever site I'm testing WordPress in this case, this is the path on my local machine, and it maps to the Vagrant site. So I have a Vagrant site called trunk that contains WordPress trunk, and it maps to it. Notice up here I've also listed what interpreter I have, and it says primary Vagrant. Because this uses Vagrant, we can actually set up a Vagrant installation, and it'll use that built-in PHP and all the options that come with it in Vagrant. And I do this by actually going to Vagrant, telling it what it is, setting my Vagrant up. We'll go back to PHP, and if you click this interpreter box, it tells you you can set up some options. One thing I've noticed with the new version of PHPStorm just came out as 9.0, and recently also VirtualBox came out with a 5.0 version. It doesn't work real well with just setting up Vagrant, so you have to set it up as an SSH. So everything else is pretty much the same. It's just a little bit goofy on how it recognizes the new versions. Hopefully they'll fix that soon. But you do got to kind of watch it. And all this does, if you look, though, is it's setting up SSH credentials into that Vagrant install. It says where PHP is installed, and it already recognized that, Xdebug is there. So it makes it real easy. So I select that I'm using that, and this include path here, I put my copy of WordPress. I'm going to get out of this settings for just a second, and if you look at how this looks now, if I look at external libraries, my PHP libraries, here's the WordPress site, the root of the WordPress site, and it's got WordPress and everything. So if you look at like this little blue dot here, every time you use a WordPress action, I can click this little blue dot here. It says, oh, well, we found this being used in 3 different places. We can click one of those, and it's going to take us to where that hook's actually being called. In theory, WordPress hooks are very well documented, stuff like that. You can see what all these little things that's being sent are. In practice, at least you can see what the what options it's being sent, where it's getting them from, so on and so forth. So that's kind of that's a very handy part of the WordPress setup. We're going to go back into settings. Also under PHP then, and one of the bigger things then is servers. Notice here I've got two versions of this website set up, Trunk and an HTTPS version of Trunk. I tend to test a lot of things, you know, call it a symptom of running security plugins for years. I test a lot of things that are HTTPS. And you set this up kind of like a website. So I've set up a new one, Trunk, whatever the host name is for your test site. And then it lists, here's my include that I picked, and here's the plugin directory. And all you do is you set the absolute path on the server. If you're running map, you might not even need to set this up. The catch is when PHP runs, it sees the file. So this is just telling it, if you run index.php, where can it find it in relation between the server and the local file? So you're just mapping those two things. Another good thing to set up here, particularly for WordPress, is Code Sniffer. Now, if you PHP Code Sniffer, and this is something if you're using primary Vagrant, this is already installed. In fact, you can just select the primary Vagrant instance at the top. If you're using something else, you're going to have to look at how they're going to set it up, or you may have to install this manually. But PHP Code Sniffer is going to allow us to actually test spacing and different things according to WordPress code standards, and it's really going to, maybe it's not going to help the functionality of your code, but when you put your code out there on GitHub or something, it looks a lot better. It's going to be a lot easier for somebody to contribute back to, and it's following a set of standards that are well established. Finally, here there's WordPress. This enables the WordPress integration, and you tell it where the core WordPress is. In this case, I just picked that Trunk WordPress site. You just got to pick the directory that already has WP includes and WP admin in it, and it'll take. That's how it maps all these hooks, like the hook integration I showed you and things like that. That's how it's going to handle all that stuff. There's other things this can do. There's things like if you were using Composer, you could set that up. If you were using PHP Unit, you could set different things up with that and get it to run the tests for you. Notice there's other languages down here. So if I had something in Markdown, I could work on that. If there was something in Node.js, I could run that. There's quite a few different things in here that can help you set that up to make it a little bit easier. But the big things are, especially with the WordPress stuff, PHP and maybe JavaScript, depending on what you're running. So that's the languages we want to set up. Not quite done yet. There's a few other things, though, that you'll want to do. And the first thing is under Build, Execution, and Deployment. Is probably going to want to set up your deployment. Where are you sending this? Now, if you're using Vagrant, if you're using Map, you're not actually copying files anywhere. You could set this to when you save a file or commit a file, it'll automatically FTP it or SFTP it or whatever you need to. Mine's a little bit simpler because it's Vagrant. I set it up. Here's my website for Vagrant, and I just set up the mappings. Real basic. You don't actually need to do this. If you're running JavaScript, it's a lot better you set this up. But it's good practice to keep in. It does keep the project. There are various warnings in different places that it'll be suppressed by turning this on, but make sure you set up the deployment. Another area you can set up then is directories. Notice this is a grunt project, so I had my node modules. Well, I've excluded it. Now you don't see it over here, so I can hide that stuff. It won't index. I don't want it searching my code every time I click on a function, or if I search for an instance of a variable. I don't want it finding identically named variables in all these node modules. If you've worked with Grunt, that could be thousands upon thousands of files. So we're going to exclude them from the search. We have a tests directory. Okay, it's empty right now. We're not getting to that part. But when I start working with PHP Unit on this particular plugin, this will help it integrate real nicely. I can specify where my tests are located. There's also the editor area up here. Now this is two really neat things. First of all, notice I have WordPress scheme set up here. When you turn on WordPress integration down in PHP settings, it'll ask you if you want to set this. It won't call it WordPress. I've renamed it for my own purposes. But this will actually go through and set how WordPress should be formatted per WordPress code standards. You can do the same thing with JavaScript or any of these languages, depending on what your plugin configuration is, SAS, SCSS. Anything you want to do, you can set it up to handle that formatting for you. In addition, if you have something like PHP Code Sniffer or any of the JavaScript or other code sniffers set up, you can turn this on. So I'm going to go to Inspect, and that's under Inspections. Under PHP, we have PHP Code Sniffer Validation. And notice here it lists coding standards. What code standards do I want to use? Squiz, WordPress, WordPress core, right up and down the line. Now, this is a Git repo. If you have primary Vagrant, you have this already. With others, you may have to install this Git repo that contains the WordPress core standards. And it has something like WordPress, which is everything. It has only WordPress core standards. Only, it can look at your doc blocks, tell you if they're wrong. Things for VIP specific. I can't remember what extras does. I actually normally typically use either WordPress core or WordPress itself, which gives me everything. Say OK, and you can see how this kind of works as we go through. Notice it's highlighted this line in yellow. Tells me use strict comparisons because that's part of WordPress core standards. If I was to, let's say I take out spaces here. I mean, how many times do you open a file and people use their own coding standards? Notice it's underlining this a little bit, and it's telling me expect one space. WordPress coding standards are expecting spaces and expecting various different items. One nice thing with PHPStorm, I could take a whole file I've written before. If I'm on Mac, it's Command-Option-L, and it reformats everything to WordPress core standards. So notice it added those spaces in. If I had a file, let's pull up something that's probably not, I'm pulling up something in core, so hopefully it should be okay. But if I had something that was non-core, if I downloaded a plugin from somebody or whatever it might be, I can go in, one look at the things here. I can probably do it here. It'll probably change something. So yeah, of course I pull up a file that's well formatted, as it should be. But if you open up maybe an old file you were working on or something somebody else is working on with no adherence to standards, you don't have to spend a while working with standards. You just Command-Option-L and it reformats the file according to whatever standards you have set, which makes things very quick. Another very handy thing we can do with this is we can actually set breakpoints and tell it how things work. Once we set up, I showed you that Xdebug setting that was it registered Xdebug. So this is a WordPress configuration file, pretty basic. I can click right next to any line I want to see. So let's stop at this define WP content URL. That's pretty basic. We're going to say run up top and start listening for PHP debug connections. Now I'm going to go back to the browser, open up the site. Whoops. Normal WordPress site, and you have to have a browser extension for this version. There's different ways to configure Xdebug, but I have it where you have to have a browser extension and I have to turn it on. That way, if I leave breakpoints in and I hit refresh, it's not stopping every, you put 100 of them in, you'd have to hit play 100 times to get things to run a lot of times. But you saw I start the Xdebugger here and I hit reload. And I wait because my server is apparently running slow. Now notice it popped back into PHPStorm and it stopped at the line I told it to. If I look at the bottom, it tells where it was called. So it starts at, initially when we open a site in WordPress, it calls index.php, which on line 4 called this require, which on line 12 called something else, which on line 42 required or called our WP config. So it tells you everything that it's called and the path that's gotten to it. And on the right here, it tells you everything it sees. So it knows at that point table prefixes, WP. WP div header is true. All your cookie values. All your server values. If I go back through like initially, well, they're all the same here. But if I was to paste through this at different places and there was different values, like if I did this later on, it would actually show me the different values of what's going on later on and things. Let's pull up something that's just going to load a little bit later. Trying to find something I know. Sometimes you hit a, yeah, there we go. Capabilities. And if I hit the play button here, now it goes to the next breakpoint because I've already set this breakpoint here. Now you can see everything that it sees. And again, if you start paging through this stuff, it shows everything of what's visible and how it's changed. Every time you see something in blue, that means it's been changed at that point. So you can see what's going on. Like if I wanted to see, for instance, WV filter here is an array, I could page through this until I get to what I want. And, oh, okay, sanitized text field. I can copy the value. I can try it with a new value and see what happens going on there. There's quite a few things I can do with it just at that point. You can turn these off. You can suspend them then. You can keep things moving. But it's really going to make things a lot easier. Instead of doing var dump or print r or whatever, the absolute worst case is you can't select a blank line. So if you have a spot where you have a blank line, sometimes I'll set shortcuts up, shortcuts in projects up for. This is in my normal project, but I'll put something like stop equals 1, and then I'll put a breakpoint there. That's the worst case scenario. The nice thing about that is if you ever forget that somewhere, it doesn't affect the output of your code. It probably won't even break a unit test or anything else. If you put var dump in and you forget it somewhere, Lord only knows what you're doing to some poor SAP site who's installed your stuff and hits that by mistake. So it's just one of those things that's something to watch out for, and it can come in very handy as far as debugging. It really will take your game up a step. Of course, there are tools like that can integrate with things like Sublime or standalone tools like MacX, I think it's called GPG debug or something. Pretty much it's the same type of setup with all those. They require you to set up the mappings and this and that. The nice thing about this, though, is now it's putting it in where you're editing the code, and it just makes things a lot easier to work with. But that's the basics of setting up a quick project on PHPStorm. So now you could debug, now you could run tests, now you could see where things are. You know, I could click on any of these functions. Where's some WordPress specific here? Let's find something WordPress specific. Of course, every file I pull up is not WordPress specific, because that would make too much sense. WP cookie constants. What the heck does that do? Click on it, takes you right to it in the file where it's defined, and you can see the whole function. Or, you know, like I say, same with hooks. It just makes it that much easier. It's not writing anything for you. It just makes it that much easier to keep your code clean and then to get to navigate what's going on, not just in your code, but in the code it relies upon as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share there and come back and see if Roy, if there's any questions. I don't know if I guess you're probably monitoring the chat or just in general if there's any questions.
Yeah. So you did all that stuff for WordPress code standardization, like standards. Is there any way to import something like that, or do you have to sit there and even at least one time make sure that those settings match WordPress standards?
There's the WordPress core standard, or here, let me pull up WordPress standards.
I understand. Is there a way to like import those, or is that built into? Is it built into PHPStorm already?
Oh, I'm sorry, I follow now. It's not built into PHPStorm because PHPStorm does not have PHP code sniffer built into it. It integrates with whatever version, remote or local, of PHP code sniffer you have, and that's where you have to have the code standards installed. I say some Vagrant installs, like primary Vagrant, have it already there for you. I don't know if variant Vagrant does. MAMP you would have to install through Homebrew or something. You'd have to install PHP code sniffer and then follow the instructions to install it. Once it's set up on your machine or your Vagrant environment or whatever you're using, you'll never have to set that up again. You can just select whatever standards you want in PHPStorm. But it does have to be installed somewhere.
Okay, so those standards aren't coming from PHPStorm. They're actually coming from your environment.
Correct.
Okay. Let's see if we got any other questions.
Hey, Chris, you want to tell them a little bit about Dash?
I mean, Dash is an application that it integrates with with PHPStorm, Coda.
I could highly recommend Dash. I love using Dash.
Dash is here. I'll share the screen for Dash. Stop presenting it. Why does it keep saying it? Stupid computer. Okay, Dash. Dash is a handy little app. It's Mac only. If you pay for it, it doesn't have any delays or anything. And what it does is it downloads the entire list of WordPress standards, WordPress codecs, PHP codecs, Node.js. This is all the codexes I've downloaded for offline use. And any place I go, like if I'm in PHPStorm, it's Command-Shift-D, and it'll open the function here in Dash. If I'm in, it depends what app you're using. This will integrate with, I'm not sure there is an app. Can you guys see the options
Yes.
screen? This is all the apps it has integration with out of the box. From Xcode to Coda to Atom, Sublime, Vim, Emacs if you're that kind of sadist, Espresso. It'll integrate with pretty much anything. And the nice thing is all this stuff is done offline. You can even download the entire WordPress Stack Exchange to search. So if you're somebody with a less reliable internet connection, or usually I use it at airports a lot, or simply just to get to things, like to get to the actual codex page on whatever function I'm working on, rather than going to the browser, searching for the function, Command-Shift-D comes right up here in Dash, good to go, makes things a lot faster.
Yeah, I like using Dash also. Even when I'm online, sometimes it's just a little bit easier for me to grab data, whatever I need. If I know exactly what function I need to be using, I'll open it up in Dash instead because it's just a little bit faster. You can also, with Dash, create your own custom offline documentation. You don't have to use one of their standards. There's ways to actually create your own using websites, and it'll try to basically scour the website and try to figure out the documentation that's there. So it's kind of a cool little offline web doc sniffer thing. It's so cool. I highly recommend using it if you tend to use documentation a lot, or if you're learning something new. It really comes in handy.
Please, for the love of God, I hope you're using documentation.
Yes.
At some point in projects.
There are no other questions right now, but I will leave the chat open on the WPCrowd.com. If you have any further questions for us or Chris, just feel free to ping us there. I'm looking forward to using it. I've now revitalized my need or want to get into PHPStorm. As our meme of the week, I tend to var dump just about everywhere and do var dump just about anything as I'm coding. And I know that I've seen with PHPStorm that could be remedied very quickly.
Not just var dump, but also console log.
Yeah, console log too. I do like the breakpoints. Hey, I also WP die every once in a while, so I mean, that's debugging. So I'm looking forward to using it. I hope someone else got something out of this. And if you have any questions or anything, go to WPCrowd.com. That's it for this week. I will see you guys next week.
Thanks, yeah.